we're bringing you that breaking story from Jersey. Jersey State's Assembly has voted in favour to allow terminally ill adults the right to choose to end their own lives. It's been approved by the State's Assembly, 32 of the Jersey parliamentarians voting for, 16 against. And this marks the final legislative stage for this landmark proposal before they go on to get the Royal Assent in the UK. And once approved, the first legal assisted deaths could happen as early as next summer. So a huge development when it comes to Jersey. Jersey joining the British Isles voting in favour of such a law. Of course, the British Isles also awaiting to get that Royal Assent. That's the next stage. But right now, let's cross over straight away to Jersey because we can speak to my colleague who is there for us. Aman, you've just broken this for us. Amar Ibrahim, BBC Jersey's political correspondent, a huge development. Politicians, parliamentarians there have spent days and also years in the build-up to this, talking about it, debating it. Just fill us in on this breaking story.
Yeah, it has felt here in Jersey that it's been a long time coming because in 2024 the Assembly approved in principle that the Health Minister would bring an assisted dying law back to the Assembly, and that debate is, included the politicians who are here today. So there's not been a big change in the makeup of the Assembly since 2024. So there was a feeling that this would likely go through after the 2024 vote. But there was still a lot of work to do because the 2024 vote was ultimately just a green light to bring a law. And since then, the Health Minister, civil servants, they have been working on this law. It's such a morally and ethically complex topic that getting the safeguards right, getting all the different protections right is crucial. And in Jersey here we have scrutiny panels who review different policies, and a specific panel was set up just for this law, the Assisted Dying Review Panel, and they've been combing over the law for months. They made 28 recommendations, and that translated into amendments that were brought to the Assembly. So over the last 2 days, politicians have just been talking about those finer details, but in a subject as complex as this, details of course really matter, and they've still been talking about those kind of big moral questions around responsibility, capacity, safeguarding, coercion. And what struck me about all the debates I've seen on assisted dying in Jersey since 2024 is they always become quite personal. Politicians always draw on their personal experiences or their faith. And I think the Assembly kind of patted itself on the back for having such a good debate, on the whole, a respectful debate. And so over the last few days it's been discussing, possible changes to the law, and those discussions have still been quite emotional and complex, even at this late stage.
Amar, I'm going to come back to you in just a moment because it would be really good just to go through those recommendations because, as you were saying, Jersey's State's Assembly brought in this panel to review what was already being discussed. They've taken their time with this, but I just want to bring our audience the moment that the vote was announced.
And I can announce that the assisted dying law has been adopted in third reading. 32 votes pour, 16 votes contre, and no abstentions.
So 32 votes for, 16 against, no abstentions. Let's cross back to Amar Ibrahim, who's in St Helier for us. Just remind us, because when that panel was brought in to review what was being proposed initially, this has been going on for many years, this conversation in Jersey, those recommendations, the 28 recommendations, how many of them were actually fully implemented? Are we aware of the level of detail that has been brought through with this bill?
Yeah, this is where it gets a little bit technical. So that assisted dying review panel is made up of politicians who sit in the chamber just behind me, and they wrote a report with 28 recommendations, which was informed by experts. Now, they said to me they hope the Health Minister will take those recommendations on board, but some of the key recommendations they put into proposals, which were debated by the Assembly, so changes to the law, if you like. So let me give you an example of one that was accepted by the Health Minister, who's actually just stood behind me talking to assisted dying campaigners. So he accepted an amendment by that panel that would increase the amount of training for staff involved in the assisted dying service so that it could spot coercion better, because of course coercion is very subtle. So there needs to be a lot of training, the panel argued, for medical staff to spot it, especially with people from different backgrounds and cultural contexts. One he rejected was around the administration of the assisted dying drug, if you like. Currently, under Jersey's draft proposal, you can self-administer, or you can get a doctor to administer the drug for you. But the assisted dying panel wanted it to be the default that the person having the assisted death administered the drug themselves. They said this would be one last layer of protection to ensure a safeguarding and autonomy. But ultimately the Assembly felt that wasn't needed. They felt there were enough safeguards in place in this law. And I think that's one important point to reiterate, that while we've had a lot of discussion about coercion in the Assembly and safeguarding, I think generally politicians here feel that the safeguards in place are sufficient.
Amar, when it comes to the next stage, this is the final legislative stage for this landmark proposal. It then has to go to get royal assent. Is this, for Jersey, is this it? Will this become an act of law now?
In some ways, it would seem that way. Royal Assent is supposed to just be a formality. But of course, we know the Isle of Man 11 months ago approved an assisted dying law, and they've still not got royal assent. We know they're being questioned on certain parts of it. So coming back to Jersey, well, that was brought up in the Assembly yesterday, and the Attorney General, who advises Jersey politicians on legal matters, he said it would be constitutionally very unusual for a law that's approved in Jersey State's Assembly to not get royal assent. And when I've talked to the Health Minister and his advisers, they say they don't feel Jersey's law is going to come up against any issues. But that is obviously not in Jersey's hands. But I'd say the mood here is quietly confident that royal assent is simply a formality, and that assisted dying will be in place here in about 18 months. So the earliest assisted death we would see in Jersey is likely to be next summer.
Amar, obviously you've been following this for a long time, and you talk about the fact that members of the State's Assembly felt that this was a dignified conversation, a full and fulsome debate. Obviously, this is such a sensitive issue and people feel so strongly about it. Just talk us through the feeling amongst the residents of Jersey about this. There was a poll relatively recently conducted. How are people perceiving what has been a really difficult debate, given the strength of feeling about this?
Yeah, I have been speaking to faith communities in the island, and they do feel really strongly that Jersey is going down a wrong path here. And, you know, in terms of public opinion, it's still quite hard to gauge. There's not been a big survey or sample size, but I think one thing we can say is that people are very aware. People I've been speaking to are sort of very conscious of the fact that this is a really big moment for Jersey. You know, it's rare that Jersey, a small island, leads on such a complex and moral issue like this. You know, Jersey usually follows policies in the UK. It doesn't kind of lead the way. So everyone's aware that Jersey has to get this right. And one politician said in the Assembly that the success of Jersey's assisted dying law won't be based on the vote count in the Assembly, and it was a convincing vote in favour, but in its implementation over the next 18 months. So I think politicians are aware of that responsibility, and islanders are aware of that responsibility. And no matter which side of the assisted dying debate you're on, I think people across the island want Jersey to get this right, to make sure it's a safe law, it's a compassionate law, it respects people's decision-making capacity. And, you know, speaking to assisted dying campaigners, some of whom are sort of still outside the Assembly behind me, you know, they feel that other jurisdictions can learn a lot from Jersey's law. But as I say, it really now, the test will be in the implementation of that law and how Jersey does it.
Now, one of the issues, Amar, when it comes to this is, of course, safeguarding. And we were talking to somebody who was hoping that this vote would indeed go this way, who was adamant that when it comes to safeguarding on Jersey, it has been finely attuned given what happened previously. Amar, I just wonder if you could just reflect a little bit on that aspect of what has been, as we were saying already, an incredibly emotive debate.
Yeah, politicians have been talking about the safeguarding, and while they tried to introduce some more measures around sort of safeguarding, they generally felt that this law had good ones in place. It is quite a long process. There'll be 7 steps. You would have to go to a coordinating doctor to apply first, and then another doctor would independently assess your application. And that does generally seem to be the consensus amongst a lot of politicians. But I did, early on when I spoke to you, when I broke the news, I mentioned to you the former health minister, Deputy Karen Wilson, who had concerns around safeguarding. She said there's still a lot of doubts. And, one of the big debates over the last couple of days has been around a waiver that is in the law. So, there's a waiver that if in around stage 5 of the process, a person going for an assisted death can sign a waiver that if they lose consciousness later on, an assisted death can still go ahead. And that really drew quite a big debate in the Assembly, because people felt that you should be able to change your mind right up to the last minute. But the majority of politicians felt, because there's so many safeguards within the law, because it's been so vigorous, because it's been so thorough, that that waiver should be kept in place. And so that waiver remains in place in the draft law. But I can imagine that is one that will be looked at closely, because that is definitely one of the more controversial bits of the conversation.
Amar, as we reflect upon this breaking story, that law to allow terminally ill adults the right to choose to end their own lives has now been approved in Jersey. It's a historic moment. We, of course, know that there are various proposals across the UK also looking at this. 5 parliaments debating assisted dying, with the draft law in England, and Wales making slow progress in the House of Lords. But you were reflecting upon what happened in the Isle of Man, the first part of the British Isles where assisted dying has been fully approved. But you made that point that it hasn't got royal assent yet. Just remind us what the sticking point is there with this.
Well, I think the BBC understands that there are concerns around some safeguardings around coercions and its compatibility with the European Convention of Human Rights. But as I say, back here in Jersey, I've been talking a lot to the health minister. He says he just doesn't think Jersey's going to come up against similar problems. But obviously that's not in Jersey's hands. We simply do not know, how royal assent will go. But the mood is definitely very confident here that the law will get royal assent. And as I mentioned earlier, the Attorney General, who advises politicians on legal matters, said it would be constitutionally very unusual if this law didn't get royal assent. But, I think there are concerns bubbling under the surface that it might get a bit held up, like the Isle of Man's has.
Amar, given that this is such a historic moment for Jersey, I wonder if we can once again see the moment that history was made when this vote was announced. And we now know that when it comes to this law to allow terminally ill adults the right to choose to end their own lives, it was approved in Jersey. Let's just have another look at the moment that the vote was announced.
I can announce that the assisted dying law has been adopted in 3rd reading. 32 votes pour, 16 votes contre, and no abstentions.
So 32 votes pour, 16 contre, so that's against, and no abstentions. Let's bring Amar back in. That's in line with what we've seen previously, because this isn't the first vote that Jersey has experienced on this.
No, so in some ways this vote, while very historic, while a huge moment for the island, is not a huge surprise, because only in January politicians approved the law in principle, and that basically means they approved the general idea of the law, the general thinking of it. It was then for that assisted review, a dying review panel, to go away to really study the detail and bring back changes to the Assembly. And over the last 2 days, they've been going over those changes. So, it's been done this way to kind of make sure the law is as robust as possible. And the debate over the last couple of days has been to bolster it, if you like, to kind of have as much thought-provoking debate on it to make sure it reflects the wider concerns of the Assembly, the wider concerns of the island, and it tries to put into place as many safeguards and protections as possible, particularly for vulnerable people.
Amar, and obviously there will be so many people who are disappointed given the way today's vote went. You have been talking to various faith groups. We know that is something that will be deeply, deeply disappointing for them.
Yes, it will be. And, I spoke to the Baptist Church earlier this week in Jersey, and they are very, very concerned about it. I was speaking sort of informally to the leader of the Muslim community here the other day, and he said, whatever decision Jersey makes, the community respects, but there is a bit of concern because there are quite a few doctors in the community who may be worried that a law that they may not sit with their religious beliefs is happening in the same health service that they work in. But, while the religious communities have those concerns, I think there is a general respect that a lot of work has gone in to making this law as safe as possible. I'd say another concern I am hearing more generally across the island is not necessarily from people who are against the law coming in, but Jersey's health service has a number of challenges. The island has been trying to build a new hospital for over a decade. A number of departments have had independent reviews due to certain failings, and there is a question that should Jersey not be spending more on health rather than an assisted dying service. But saying that, while those concerns exist, I've been speaking to people who, I was speaking to one woman who has incurable breast cancer, and she says knowing that this assisted dying service will come in will help her live her remaining days much better, knowing that she can have an assisted death. So, Jersey, like anywhere, there's a real mix of views, but obviously a small island like this, a population of 110,000, those views are much closer together, if you like. They rub up against each other a lot more. But I think, the consensus is that the politicians here have put a lot of work in, and Jersey is a place where, there is a lot of political apathy, where people are generally very frustrated with their politicians because they expect a bit more, they expect a faster pace of change. But the Minister for Economic Development, Deputy Kirsty Morrell, who actually opposed the law, he said that, what this showed is that Jersey politicians can get things done, and they have got something done that the islanders can see. And Deputy Louise Doublé, who chaired that assisted review panel, she said, I think this law that we're giving to the island, which has such safeguards underpinning it, is a gift to the island.
Yes, and obviously there will be different voices who will be upset by this, but Amar, just for those of our audience members who are watching this and thinking, how is Jersey able to vote on this? Of course, just remind us with your political correspondent hat on, if you will. Jersey is a self-governing British Crown dependency, so Jersey has its own legal, fiscal and administrative system. So that's why, like the Isle of Man, they can vote on something as significant as this.
Yes, Jersey's been making its laws for over 800 years, and it has its own government, has 49 politicians, they sit in that state's chamber behind me. That should mean that things move faster, but there's often a feeling in Jersey that things do move a bit slower. But on this, there has been real impetus, there has been a real feeling for some time across successive governments, based on public consultations, that this is something that should be delivered. And I would say one reason for sort of the pace of change here has been that the Health Minister, Deputy Tom Binet, he gets a lot of criticism in the Assembly, but this is something that was very close to his heart. He's spoken about the deaf as his father and how that informed his view. And I think he went into politics for this reason. That was something that was alluded to in the Assembly. And I think in Jersey, you know, when there is a minister who really wants to drive a policy through, there's still all the checks and balances you'd expect. But being a smaller jurisdiction, things can move a bit faster. There's no upper chamber here for things to get held up in. But obviously the caveat being, while Royal Assent is a formality, we've seen with the Isle of Man, it's not always so smooth.
Amar Ibrahim, BBC Jersey's political correspondent, joining us live from St Helier, breaking that news that Jersey has approved the assisted dying law. Thank you very much for your comprehensive coverage. Amar Ibrahim there, joining us from St Helier. And that is, of course, something that is very historic, a law to allow terminally ill adults the right to choose to end their own lives has been approved in Jersey.